We're talking about first-time home sellers with Melissa today because, you know, as a first-time home seller, it's completely different. It's a whole different process from buying. We've actually calculated about 185 steps in selling a property.
It's a lot of steps.
When you're going to buy a property at the same time, we'll talk about this later on in the segment, it's an additional about 175. So you're at 360, and that's what it does. You know, people spin around 360 like, oh.
And when you're selling, I think, you know, aside from listing the property and all the steps that are going to be involved in doing that, relative to the closing itself and what's involved in the actual completing the sale, once you have your house under contract, you need to be thinking about, well, what are the next steps relative to, you know, timing for scheduling movers? Those logistical difficulties, I think, is where everybody starts panicking. So as a first-time seller, you have to anticipate that there may be delays and that you may have to have a mover who can be somewhat flexible, or that you have a contingency plan.
Melissa, with first-time sellers, some of the things that I've seen from the other end when we had the buyer on first-time sellers was they weren't certain that the closing date was a target date. They were talking more along the lines as this is a drop dead, time is the essence date. Can you explain how that works in the Rhode Island contract?
Definitely. So as a buyer or seller, I think very often there's a lot of weight given to the purchase and sales closing date that's prescribed in the contract as a set in stone, this is the day.
Yeah.
And that is just not the case, because Rhode Island purchase and sales agreements do not have a time is of the essence provision, which means it's fluid. So again, if we close on or about that date, we're going to call it good. And the general rule of thumb is a couple of weeks is considered reasonable, quote unquote reasonable, in order to complete the contract.
The mortgage contingency section.
Yeah.
That's another one too that can be extended. And there's so many times where we have first time sellers that have said in the past, like, hey, you know what? I don't want to extend that. The buyer's going to lose their deposit. No, that's not how it works.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Again, there's a lot of misnomers around that. So the contingency deadline says that if the buyer does not secure their commitment letter by that date, then essentially their deposit is in jeopardy of being lost if they don't conduct the closing on time. But as long as they're able to conduct the closing on time, the fact that the mortgage contingency deadline has since passed does not matter.
One of the biggest mistakes and the biggest hurdles that first-time sellers go through is doing things the way that they have always been done. And basically, well, everyone else does it like this. I'm going to do it like this. And what I'm talking about is not having a pre-list home inspection. So there's a method behind our madness. It's because we fix the garbage that is going to come up and really shoot you in the foot later on. Right? So you have to make sure that your home can qualify for certain types of financing, FHA, VA, Rhode Island housing.
Well, and not to mention, you know, you have a first-time home buyer who may be nervous to begin with. Then you have a home inspection with a litany of issues. That's enough to say, you know what, I don't know if I want to move forward. Where if you can kind of nip that in the bud, as they say, and avoid those issues, now it looks like you've got a rock-solid house. That buyer that may have been a little bit skeptical is feeling a lot more secure about the investment. I think just for sellers, you know, making sure that you are hiring counsel so that you understand the debts that are associated with the house that need to be paid, mortgages, lines of credit, you know, any kinds of liens that may have ripened against the title. And we talk about pre-listing home inspections. You can also do a pre-listing title inspection. Also making sure you understand that your real estate taxes need to be trued up or caught up. Most communities in Rhode Island, the taxes are 6 months behind. So that's something that sellers are not anticipating. They're just thinking they're paying them as part of their mortgage, and now they have this big line item at the closing that's like a gut punch that they've just lost access to those funds.